Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney.
And Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice. Welcome to today's episode, From Overwhelm to Awareness, Mindfulness in High Stress Moments.
Is it hard to sit and practice mindfulness right now? Is even loving kindness meditation a challenge? Do your thoughts and anxiety feel overwhelming and stressful? The reality is that this moment in time is different. There is more chaos, more uncertainty, and more things outside of our control. It is a shift away from things that have felt familiar and safe.
Our intention is to share how we, Jessie and I, are personally practicing mindfulness in these tumultuous times, and to share what's working for us and also what's not working for us, in hopes that some of this information in our sharing helps you as well. We hope that you'll leave with a reinvigoration of energy at committing to mindfulness practice in ways that work for you, that are personalized, that are abound with curiosity, trying new things in new ways with mindfulness.
The background of this episode is that someone I work with mentioned that while in the past she has been an exceptional meditator and mindfulness practicer, and that right now was hard, and that when she would go to sit, that she would feel distracted and it would be hard to sit. And as she said this, I thought, wow, that's exactly my experience. And I mentioned it to you, Ni-Cheng, and it was a bit of your experience. And we started to talk about how we're practicing mindfulness in this moment, because in tumultuous times, mindfulness is actually more needed than ever, and it's harder to practice. And so today's episode is shared in the spirit of that. And before we get started, let's just take a moment to ground ourselves, a tool that I find really helpful in this moment. And so wherever you happen to be, finding something that feels grounding, feet on the floor or your seat on the chair, and close your eyes if it's safe, and just take a moment to find your breath. And enjoy 3 good, lovely, slow breaths. Then bring a hand to heart and another hand to top, and enjoy the pressure on your chest, the connection of hand on hand and hand on heart, and the connection to your heart and your human body. If you can, bring your mind and your body into this same space. Breathe in and out. Keep it simple. Notice your chest rise and fall. Press that hand into the heart space. Release a little bit of oxytocin. Let it circulate. Gift yourself a little bit of feeling good. Once again, noticing the physical pressure of the hand on your heart, the hand on top of hand. Notice perhaps feet on the floor, seat on the chair, and enjoy one more breath. Let it out. And take one more moment to notice how this feels. A minute of pause can make a world of difference. Slowly lower hands and open your eyes, letting the light in. And we will come back and chat about practicing mindfulness in the midst of overwhelm and anxiety. So we thought we would share some things that are working for us and our strategies in this moment and of time. And for me, as I thought about it, primary messages would be get creative, be curious, and be compassionate. So I'm into some alliteration here, the 3 C's: get creative, be curious, be compassionate. And recognizing that good enough is still good. I think we very often think that if we can't sit on a mat or we can't do this, that it's not good and it doesn't make a difference. But good enough is still good and provides tremendous benefit. So one of my strategies is what I like to call microdosing. And microdosing would be just a pause, or a pause and a couple breaths, or a simple hand on heart. It could also be a mindful moment. And I'm going to put a plug in here for at the end of most of our podcast episodes, there is a mindful moment, a 3 to 10 minute practice. It doesn't have to be long. And the invitation of these moments are that you can do them anywhere, anytime, and you don't need to listen to the whole podcast, though we'd love it if you did. But that they are an offering that we're gifting just simply from the heart, because most of us don't have tons of time. And in this moment, we might not have the capacity to sit. And so try a moment, a mindful moment, start there. You can also find mindful moments on Headspace or Calm or any of the bajillion Mindspace mindfulness apps out there. And Nicheng, you have some mindful moments on your webpage as well. Am I wrong? How do people find those while we're chatting about it?
You can go to awakenbreath.org, and under resources, there are mindfulness practices in duration from anywhere from a minute to 45 minutes of guided audio by yours truly. And then I also added a section on a visual meditation where you're looking at something very special in nature in silence.
I love that. It reminds me of our forest bathing episode where we actually have a forest bathing mindful moment. And so recognizing that simply a moment can make a huge difference. And we just practiced for less than a minute, and that made a huge difference. The next thing that really helps me is what I call dropping in. And so it's literally pausing and physically dropping into your body. It's what I do at the beginning of yoga, where you notice that sense of like bringing mind, body, and spirit into the same place. And so for me, that's grounding. And it's very helpful to notice holes of the feet on the ground. For me, I also use my toes. Anyone who's practiced yoga with me knows that I talk about toes and the 4 corners of the feet. That is a grounding technique that brings all the spinniness back to one spot. You can also use your sit bones. It's one of the reasons why I sit on the floor cross-legged in yoga to start. It's another way of grounding. You can lie on the floor. That's also grounding, or on the ground, or on the grass, or under a tree. These grounding moments can happen anywhere. They can happen when you are coming to your computer to type in your exam room. They can happen when you arrive somewhere. But taking that moment of transition and that moment to ground, again, a micro moment, can make a huge difference. My next one that's really working well for me is nature. And it's what I go to when I feel spinny. Many of you will remember that when I first became an empty nester, I had to go back out in nature. I also had to move in nature, but even nature itself calms your mind. And so, literally going to the park, hanging out under a tree, watching a bird, the birds are in California coming out for spring, and how wonderful to watch them just sit in the moment and watch, or watch a lizard. Thinking nature can really help us calm and can be a very simple way of practicing mindfulness. The other thing that I find incredibly helpful is practicing in community. And so when I teach yoga, that's community. And this idea of shared experience and coming together, it feels really good in when things outside you feel uncertain. Retreats, the same thing. When you bring people together, just the bringing people together feels good to your nervous system. And so finding a way to practice in community, find a local class if you can, or a group of people. I'm thinking you need to practice your dragon boating and your climbing with other people, and that it's the presence of other people can help you, even if you're not talking to them, but if they're in the same space, it just feels really lovely. Another technique that I find really helpful in wild, chaotic, tumultuous times like we find ourselves is the thought download technique, which is different than journaling. And we'll talk a bit more about journaling later, but writing things down just as a way of processing, writing down your anger, writing down the crazy thoughts in your head, writing down your worries so that they're not spinning in your head. And I think sometimes people don't want to do this because they're like, if I write it down, maybe it'll be true, or maybe I'll remember it more. But I find it's happening in your head anyway. And so if you can see it on paper, you can actually ask yourself, like, is that true? What's the chance of that? That makes me feel better, because I find my brain tends to hear things these days and just spiral off. And so a thought download can let me actually see the spirals. If we don't see them, we can't change them. One of my other favorite things, which is literally a mindfulness practice, is allowing the discomfort. And so choosing when you're going to be angry or when you're going to be frustrated, or just sitting in the ick of it and actually allowing it rather than resisting it, is a beautiful way to let it move a little bit. Most of us resist it and don't want to be angry and don't want to be scared and don't want to be this, and letting it move can be really, really helpful. There are some amazing ways to do that that would take longer to explain, that can either be done in mindfulness. I use them a lot in coaching. And I think just being really present with yourself and your body and what's happening, and not resisting. It's so foreign to us in medicine, I think, to allow discomfort and to allow anger. We're supposed to be good and contain it all and potentially not feel those things and process things so we don't. But that's not actually human. And then the other thing I think is really helpful is a thought partner. And while you might say that's not mindfulness, I will say picking up the phone and connecting with a human and just letting yourself have a conversation and be in that moment and receive what they have and give what you have, that is actually, for me, a form of mindfulness. And you can do it mindfully rather than sort of trying to get something out of the conversation or direct it or have it be like an advocacy conversation. It can just be in the moment with another human, and that processing can be really helpful. That is actually why I find coaching really helpful, because it's sort of processing in this neutral way. And your goal, you don't really have a goal. You always end up with something amazing, but it's really helpful to be in that mindful space and just experience the process. Things can shift dramatically. And I'm going to give a shout out to Ni Cheng, who sometimes I call her and I say, hey, I need this. I'm going to call it a mindful moment now. I sometimes say a consult, but it's really a mindful moment with her. And so have your person. I like to say your want match. She's my want match for processing some things, and I think I'm your want match in a kind of a similar way. But I do think it's important to notice who that person is. So, for example, I don't go to my husband with those things. He is not my want match for that, because it stresses him out. Like, you need the person who can hold space for you and you can hold space for them. And it's a mindful experience. So if you've tried it and it's not mindful, someone who's jumping into the fray with you, that is not actually practicing mindfulness. So just noticing, I think is really helpful. And for me, which is a little bit different, I think, than traditional mindfulness, I like to practice intention and choosing energy and with intention and noticing energy and potentially reframing. So if I think like asking the question, what would love do is mindfulness for me? It's a little bit more structured mindfulness, but sometimes in moments of trauma and chaos, and I think for many, this is a moment of trauma. It's bringing up a lot of old trauma, historical trauma, that asking questions and being a little bit more structured can be helpful. I know that when I have been under a lot of stress, I find a guided meditation, same idea, more helpful. So having someone there who can help guide you and can help you reframe thoughts, not into BS thoughts that you don't believe and not into toxic positivity thoughts, but thoughts that feel light and feel liberating and feel 100% true to you. And then for me, I like to step out of the practice of mindfulness and into what I call philosophic mindfulness, which is those tenets of mindfulness, like kindness and um, patience. When things are scary, I tend to be, I'll just take ownership for this, very impatient and urgent to fix it and feel better. And when they're uncertain, I want certainty. And so leaning into some of these tenets and say like, oh, right, it's patience. That's really a practice of mindfulness. So I can lean into that piece. Or generosity is one of my favorites, which is telling okay stories, not the worst stories. um, and maybe they're not the best stories. Maybe they're not, this is all going to be amazing, but maybe it will be okay. Or thinking about stories that help you feel more grounded and more safe, or looking at what is already safe and where the people you love are for today safe, for example. And then I have two more, and then I can't wait to hear what's working for you, because I think it's interesting that we have different things that work for us. And that's one of the invitations of this podcast is we're all different and different things work for us in different moments. There's not a one way to practice mindfulness. So movement-based mindfulness for me is magic. That is how I got into yoga. I tell this story often that I did yoga when I was in a really difficult spot because I could not sit still and practice mindfulness. I actually had to move. And that was how I learned to drop in. And the more I practiced and the more I was able to be in my body, I could do it on my own. But when I started, I couldn't. Walking is another one. And sometimes it's not just walking, it's like walking fast uphill helps you to move things. But that can be a practice of mindfulness if you do it mindfully. It's how you do it. And then the last one is sound and music, which is a new one for me. I've in the last few years gotten into sound baths or sound healing, which I love. And I find it really helpful for me in getting out of my head. And then the other thing that I've been doing, which has just been so fun, is actually going to hear a lot of live music because people singing along in community feels really good. You're in the presence of others, and music can trigger emotions and internal states that we don't have access to otherwise. And so a lot of music you've heard in other settings at times when you felt good. You heard it at a wedding or you heard it. Um, I was actually at a show last night. I have a mom's band that I love, and they're actually one of the moms is from my nursery school, and they play songs that like my dad used to play in the kitchen when I was growing up. And so it triggers this like coming down in the morning with your dad being happy and dancing to music. It feels amazing. And so I think again, you just got to get creative. And I wouldn't have ever thought, oh, that would be a mindfulness practice, but I find it very mindful to sit and listen to music and sing along because you really have to kind of be in your body or not sing along if you don't want to. But dancing for me isn't so mindful, but I think for other people it might be. So again, you got to work with you and figure out what feels really good to you. So I want to hear your strategies because maybe I can steal and borrow some more.
There's no stealing, there's all abundance and generosity here. And just reminding everyone that mindfulness is paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment. So you can apply mindfulness to doing or not doing anything at all at any moment in time. So really, it's limitless what you can apply mindfulness to. So I wanted to share personally that I've been pretty restless as of late for a multitude of reasons. And while I still do practice sitting, mindfulness meditation, mindful movement in new and creative ways of my body, and then also using that as a catalyst for connecting in new and creative ways with people that I've always wanted to connect with, or deepening relationships from before. That has been kind of the very positive side effect of pursuing creative mindful movement. So that has been really healing and soul filling, and most importantly, it's been really fun. And I'll delve a little bit more into the different types of creative movement, new to me types of activities that I've been trying out. So I also wanted to give a shout out to my mental health care team, because I feel very supported in this very tumultuous time of the country. They have been there for me holding space. And so in past episodes, I had talked about a scaffold. So like a scaffold of support. And I feel at my back this unconditional support there, ready to weather whatever storms arise in this uncertainty of the country right now. I also have, in terms of like formal sitting practice, I have intentionally, as you had mentioned, Jessie, that doing a guided practice sometimes is what's needed instead of trying to guide yourself in a practice. So that's what I did, is that I knew I needed additional supports, like to add to that scaffold, some reinforcements. So I joined Professor Rhonda McGee. So she's a law professor. She is an expert at the intersection between racism and mindfulness, and the author of The Inner Work of Racial Justice, that I highly recommend. And she actually came on to the Mindful Healthcare Collective book club. And so there is a YouTube recording of that. So we will make sure to include that link in the show notes. But I highly recommend watching that. But she is actually holding a 8-week meditation session called Practicing as the Mountain. And so using the nature aspect of the mountain as being something that is resilient and strong and grounded, as a way of grounding us in these tumultuous times. So those practices have been tremendously helpful. They are with like 20 plus people on Zoom from all over the world, which is really nice. And yeah, I'm really grateful for those sessions. I also wanted to call out something, because part of why this episode came to be and why we're even talking about it is because when we envision what mindfulness practice should be, that is actually potentially problematic, because mindfulness practice, as I said, is applicable to anything, anytime, anywhere. But in our minds, and perhaps it's because of the way that mindfulness was introduced to the US, there's a picture of what mindfulness practice should be. And also, if you have had a strong sitting practice before, and you've had quote unquote good meditations, what the experience of a sitting practice should be. So I'm just going to call out that, yeah, there is probably some attachment to these shoulds. And this is an opportunity to release that, acknowledge the shoulding, release that, work with what is right in front of you right now, what's available to you and what's working for you now. Because right now, like maybe sitting practice isn't going to be serving you. That being said, though, playing the opposite side of the card, I forget which meditation teacher, or actually several, I remember, have told me and have taught in classes that if you feel like you don't have time to practice mindfulness, like some sort of formal mindfulness practice, that is exactly the sign that you need in order to remind you that you need to be practicing mindfulness. And I almost said should.
Yeah.
notice that. But it's actually a really great signal for you to prioritize this self-care practice. So
And can I
with,
interrupt for a sec? I
yeah,
want to
go
just
ahead.
mention, it is absolutely a time that we need it more, right? But that because I think for many people, what's happening feels like trauma. It's that understanding of how trauma interplays with mindfulness and practicing in a way that doesn't cause you more trauma. Do you want to comment on that? Because you've had some wise words in the past.
Yeah, so mindfulness practice is not a panacea for everything. People who have experienced trauma or are currently experiencing trauma, sitting practice or some sort of stillness practice may not serve you because if the thoughts and the actual experience of trauma are still very fresh, you're in your state of overwhelm, and trying to practice mindfulness in a state of overwhelm and kind of white knuckling through it can actually be quite harmful from a mental health perspective. Like mindfulness practice should not be white knuckling through a practice. Like mindfulness practice should be something that's um, relatively enjoyable, and that first and foremost, Hippocratic oath, first do no harm, and please apply that to yourself as well. When and if you find yourself in a situation where you do find that a certain type of mindfulness practice is setting off or triggering you to go into a state of overwhelm, let that be your signal to ground yourself, come out of the practice, do what's self compassionate for you to ground back into your zone of safety. So sometimes that can be simply opening the eyes, noticing the support of the ground beneath your feet, literally like noticing the feet as a ways of grounding, noticing the support of the hands. So something tactile is oftentimes helpful to get back into the zone of safety. So while I'm saying uh, that these thoughts of like, oh, I don't have time to practice, oh, I really can't do my sitting meditation practice right now, um, notice the edge that is present for you there, but let that edge be one of self-compassion as well. Like what you decide to do, whether or not you do want to play around curiously with the edge of sitting practice and the discomfort in that versus doing something that you know will bring you comfort, like that is your choice and your ultimate decision. But I highly recommend that if there's any active depression, severe anxiety, or active trauma, that a mental health care professional is there to support you and even guiding you through what may or may not be helpful in formal mindfulness practice. So, that being said, if you are able to try to sit and it's still uncomfortable for you, but you're not into your zone of safety, you just find that there's a lot of mind wandering, there's a lot of spiraling from getting attached to sticky thoughts, quote unquote, and spiraling into stories about that. Um, the invitation is actually to notice that and to give yourself permission to sit with the discomfort. Sit with the discomfort because it's in your zone of challenge, and that is where a lot of growth and learning can take place. Not that we're trying to be goal oriented in our mindfulness practice, but um, it is an opportunity to experience the sitting practice in a way that might be different for you compared to when you were practicing in not so tumultuous or uncertain times. So just having a generosity and an authentic abundance mentality about it. But like I said, like if you find yourself in overwhelm, that is a signal for you to get back into your zone of safety. Even if it's quote unquote what you are judging and noticing the judging, if a sitting practice ends up being very much all about mind wandering, that even that noticing of the mind wandering, those moments of noticing of mind wandering, that's still practice.
Mm.
So with that, let me get into specific strategies. So my coping mechanisms, if you will, and my desire to fill my energy reserves, my feel good reserves, my grounding reserves, has been very body focused. So for body scan, I had shared in prior episodes that I use body scan oftentimes if I wake up in the middle of the night because I'm in surgical menopause, so my sleep isn't great, but it's actually been okay as of late. But if I wake up, one of the more automatic things I'll do is start my own self-guided body scan, and usually I'm able to fall back asleep by the time I'm like at my thighs. So you can check out body scan practices on my website, awakenbreath.org. And also there are a multitude of different video and audio recordings to try. The other thing also is that in body scan, it's not necessarily about releasing tension, it's actually about noticing where there is discomfort. And so there's always a choice when you notice discomfort. You can sit with it, but you can also do something about it. So in body scan practice, there's always an invitation to move into a position of increased comfort. So if your back is hurting, you don't necessarily have to white knuckle through the practice. Yeah, you can acknowledge that pain is there. You can even like decide what shape that pain looks like and what color it is. But like you can also give yourself permission to move out of that this uncomfortable position. I have finally, and I say this finally because I don't know, I think there was some sort of subconscious resistance to buying a tool, maybe similar to the seat pad in my dragon boat practice, but I bought a hook, like a J hook, for working out the tension that I notice in the trapezius muscle. So that's where I carry a lot of my tension, is like in the shoulders and the neck, and the interface between the neck and the shoulders. So that those are the traps. And the hook with the little knobby thing at the end, I'm able to like work out the kinks really well and do it in a very mindful way. So like in order to know where to put that hook, I have to notice the discomfort and tension. So that's been really helpful. And the hook is my self-compassionate way to help that. The other thing as a pulmonologist is the breathwork technique. So I do incorporate that in my own clinical practice with my patients, especially ones with chronic obstructive lung disease. Breathwork techniques lend themselves to activating the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest relaxation nervous system. And incidentally, I'll be giving a presentation in Montana in a couple of weeks about this. But the mindful moment at the end will include some breathwork techniques that I will invite you to do with me. So if there is discomfort, stress, anxiety, yes, acknowledge it, but you can also choose your response. And sometimes my response includes one of those breathwork techniques, like pursed lip breathing or the 4-7-8 breath, for instance. And then I have been much more creative with how I've been practicing mindfulness, and not just like art per se, but because I actually haven't been like quote unquote creating art or like writing a whole lot. I've actually been moving my body in different ways than I'm used to. So yes, I'm an avid dragon boat paddler, but I've also incorporated now outrigger canoe paddling. And I just finished my first competition and my first race a couple of weeks ago. So that was really outside of my comfort zone for that and training for it. And also, incidentally, our time trials for getting seats in our upcoming festival for competition are currently happening right now. So that kind of new creative movement has actually been built into our dragon boat training anyway, which I'm really grateful for. You mentioned climbing. So I'm now a certified top rope belay climber. I'm very proud of the certification because I didn't pass the first time that I took the test. But it's been really fun. It's like a climbing gym for adults, and yes, kids are there, but like the ones for adults are like 30, 40, 50, 60 feet up. And I go with one of my dragon boat teammates who happens to also be a physician. And it is literally a way of climbing mountains and working through challenging obstacles. It's a very physical way. And climbing in and of itself is very mindful because you're thinking about your body positioning, looking immediately around you to see what's available for you to receive support and what's available for you to push off of. And then if you're the belayer, the person that's holding the rope so that if the climber falls, and then also the belayer helps to lower the climber, that's a very mindful practice as well, because you really have to pay attention to your climber and you have to pay attention to how much rope they have too. So if it's available to you, I highly recommend that you take a belay class and check it out and see for yourself if that's something that you might like to playfully participate in. So climbing is now part of my weekly self-care routine, and that's been really fun. Um, the other thing about creativity is like, yes, totally agree with you. Nature, 100%, like get all the nature exposure that you can. Even if you don't feel like you need additional nature, like build in nature time, regularly scheduled programming. So I had shared in prior episodes that I take walks between my morning and afternoon sessions of patients. Now I have taken a different path. I head towards the ocean during my urban hiking time during lunch, and I have seen really encouraging signs in people's lawns. I've seen the ocean. So now when I go on this urban hike between morning and afternoon clinic, I get to see the ocean. And then I also sometimes will take a detour and go to a playground and walk and take some laps there. So it's like giving yourself permission to do things that have worked for you historically in the past, but then like being creative and playful with what else? What else could you do with that urban hike? What else could you see and notice? Um, and then the other aspect of creativity here is cooking. So you're very lucky, Jessie, because you have like an expert, professionally trained chef as a spouse. But not a whole lot of cooking happens in my household traditionally, but I actually in the last couple of weeks have been delving into trying out new recipes. It's been really relaxing and a lovely outlet, and also there's something nurturing about um, picking out the food and prepping it with hands. I've been making dumplings like from my mother-in-law's recipe, and they are delicious. But like I am like a machine. I am a dumpling making machine, and there's a lot of mindfulness involved with making hand making dumplings. And there's a interconnectedness there too. So the family has been pitching in and helping out with dumpling making along with my extended family as well. So that was actually like one of our closing activities for the end of Lunar New Year celebrations, for instance. Um, all of the above things that I've just mentioned are also really great mindful ways to connect.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing about creativity, and I know you're also an expert, Jessie, at this, but decluttering. So I'm um,
Yeah.
if you look at my desk right now, my laptop is sitting in like a foot of clear open space on my desk, but otherwise there's like papers and little tchotchkes and chargers and books splayed all over the place.
Mhm.
But taking the time to declutter, which we did as a family not that long ago, all of the cabinets in the kitchen, that was actually really cathartic and healing on like mind, body, and spirit levels. So I'm setting the intention to declutter my desk and my walk-in closet slowly but surely. So that's actually another creative way to practice mindfulness. There's a lot of intentionality that goes into decluttering, and then Also, I invite everyone to think about creative generosity. So as there's decluttering, you can think about who might benefit most from this object that no longer brings you joy or that you no longer need. So, like the local Buy Nothing group has been one way, various different charities around town. I've been donating to silent auctions for my kids' schools, for instance, with mindfulness sessions. So there's a myriad of different ways that you can creatively use mindfulness in very generous ways and like giving back, but in a way that doesn't harm you or deplete you, can actually be quite soul filling as well.
What I'm hearing is that mindfulness can actually look like anything. It's the way we do it, or the approach, or the attitude of what we're doing. Because absolutely, decluttering can be a mindful activity. Sitting on the couch with a family member can be a mindful activity. And so, in this moment, the invitation is really about leaning into where you feel safe and comfortable and what's helpful for you. So, we thought we'd pivot to what is not working for us. And I will say what's not working for me is when I will say non-mindful social media and non-mindful news. And I think that it, for me, I really have to recognize how things feel and decide what's helpful and what's not helpful. I used to find that certain spaces I was in were always sort of safe spaces where I wouldn't hear about things, but that's not really true now. So I think for me, recognizing that everyone's triggered and responding in their own way, and that I need to the word I don't love this word guard, but I need to curate my spaces carefully. And if I'm not mindful of curating where I'm spending my time and the energy that I put myself in, um, that is not working for me. And so it flips me to being more mindful and being more intentional. And I think one of the things that I have noticed from that is I find myself leaning into putting out more, but not open to receiving more at this moment. I know that that balance shifts at different points in time, but because it's very hard to filter all the stuff that's out there, the receiving mindfully is not working very well for me right now, and that um, I just find it hard to curate it without spending too much energy on it, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, so the doom scrolling definitely, I can too easily get caught up in the social media scrolling and then seeking out news because I feel like um, there's like a paucity of knowing what's truly happening because of the current state of things with the media. So almost like this like insatiable need to seek out the truth, which is good to a certain extent, but then all too quickly it can turn into doom scrolling and a lot of wasted time and not helpful energy from what I'm reading. And then also shopping. Yeah, I will admit that I have been shopping a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um shopping, I have to be very mindful about noticing if it's a way to numb or bypass the discomfort that I'm feeling or
Mm,
the scarcity that I'm feeling.
mm.
Um, but I can still also lean into that and shop mindfully as well. So all of these quote unquote what we're struggling with, these can also all be opportunities to practice mindfulness.
Yeah, I think it's literally when we are doing things where we're not being mindful, that's where we're struggling. And while if we could hold the mindfulness softly and just recognize that if we can curate and be thoughtful and pause rather than react, things, our experience of all the things, whatever it is, can be really powerful. I'm thinking, especially you were sort of mentioning buffering when you talk about shopping. And I was thinking, I think a lot of people are buffering with alcohol and eating and other things. And so it's like, find what would I call real dopamine, true dopamine, healthy dopamine. Being out in nature is healthy dopamine, connection with friends, healthy dopamine, laughing, healthy dopamine, versus things that release dopamine that actually make you feel worse in the end. Binging on ice cream or buying a whole lot of things to make yourself feel better in the moment. And so I really like the idea of asking myself, like, is this going to feel better now? Is it also going to feel better later? Sometimes it does. Like a great dessert is fun and feels, can feel really nourishing in some ways, but every night or too much of it doesn't, if that makes sense.
The other thing also for buffering is like Netflix and chilling, or like
Mm.
uh just mindlessly watching something. I've been very intentional in what I've been watching in terms of like picking well-known storylines. And I think there's a comfort in knowing what happens in the end.
Well, and this is the intentionality of it, right? Choosing like happy movies and movies that make you laugh and things that feel good. This is a beautiful time for that.
Yeah. But it's a slippery slope because you can all too often, when that next episode sign comes up,
True, 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 true.
it's a slippery slope. So to just be, it's another opportunity to practice mindfulness
And
and
be
discern.
and pause. And I think the last bit that we haven't talked about much today is just this idea of self-compassion and being kind to ourselves, knowing that human beings, when the world is going at a pace that's different than usual and change is happening and it's very unfamiliar, that of course we're gonna freak out, and of course our brain's gonna tell stories, and of course we're gonna feel unsettled, and of course mindfulness might feel unsettled. And it doesn't mean that we're bad at it or we're not doing it or we're failing. I think it's a challenging time that's going to require creativity and curiosity and mixing it up. And it's possible also that in that you'll find the thing that you really love that you've missed. I would say for me, like the thing has been a lot of music. Like I haven't been doing a lot of that in my life. Well, I think when you have kids at home, it's harder to go out and listen to music on a weeknight, for example. But now I'm like, wow, that's something I can do that feels good. That is a mindful thing. So it might open doors to things that you have forgotten about. So being compassionate to yourself and being okay with your imperfection or complete imperfection is reasonable and advisable. So our final thoughts, I think my thought is no single solution fits all. Experiment, have fun, be patient. And the question that I would ask, because we dive into our reflection questions, is asking yourself how kindness would practice mindfulness, or what kind of mindfulness would love practice right now. I love to dive into that. What would love do? Would it sit on a mat? Would it climb a mountain? Would it spend time with loved ones? So maybe asking healthy questions in that way.
And my question for you is, we've given you a myriad of different ideas for ways of practicing mindfulness, and you'll have your own ideas. So, what invitations from today's episode would you like to take us up on? And are there things that have uh, been inspired by that we haven't mentioned that you would like to try on your own?
So much, much gratitude for listening to us today and joining us for the podcast. Many of you are regular listeners, and we really appreciate that. I've been hearing from a lot of you that you've been listening for a long time. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And our request of you is that you share the podcast. This one in particular, I think could be useful to so many people, medicine or not, friends or family or colleagues, or even patients. Nothing here is medical advice, but I think everyone in this moment in time needs a healthy practice of mindfulness in whatever way works for them. And things would be better for all of us if everyone were showing up mindfully in this moment. We're going to um, be at this for a while, it seems. And so developing healthy tools at the outset for ourselves and those we love is a really powerful practice. So please share the podcast. We put this out here with love, and it also takes a lot of time and energy. And so share it with others so that they can benefit as well. And we encourage you to take one step at a time. There's no rush, no urgency to get anywhere differently. And we offer always opportunities to find more resources, support, or community. So I'm going to put a plug in for the Mindful Healthcare Collective, whether you join it online, which is the mindfulhealthcarecollective.com, or our Facebook community. You can request to join, and Cheng or I screens you to make sure that you're a fit for that community. But it's a lovely, supportive space. And now it was formed during the pandemic, similar times where people were feeling overwhelmed. And now is a great time to be a part of it. Also, a nudge to join us for the Connect in Nature retreat to practice mindfulness in nature and to fill up a toolbox of useful tools, learn a bit about breath work and sound healing, and practice some yoga and mindfully eat and be in community and connect. You can also coach with me. I'm going to mention that lots of people are reaching out for coaching because this is another moment in time where it helps. And if you have these tools, they will help you navigate whatever's ahead for us. And if a retreat works, you can join me for a retreat where we do coaching in person, in community. And for some people, that is what they need right now. Again, it's responding creatively to this current situation. I still teach yoga, started as a pandemic thing and is once again, super, super needed, always needed, but needed more in this moment. And I teach most weekends, either Saturday or Sunday at 9. So join me. If you get on my email list, then you get the updated schedule, because occasionally I don't teach because I'm away speaking at a conference or I have children visiting. So if you're on my list, you get the schedule, and I teach a lot, and it's a really beautiful, loving community and a chance to practice. And then the last bit I'm reminded of, because Cheng mentioned that she's going to give a talk on mindfulness, that both of us actually do a lot of talks, and we would love to come share what we share in the Mindful Healer podcast with your community at grand rounds or conferences or workshops. So reach out to us because the message is worth sharing, in my humble opinion. So thanks so much for listening today, and stay on after the singing bowl for Cheng's breath practice, which she will share with all of you, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes. And please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely. Welcome to this mindful moment offering. If it's safe for you to do so, inviting you to close your eyes or lower your gaze a few inches in front of you. Start by noticing the points of contact between you and the surrounding environment. Noticing whatever is supporting you, from the ground to a chair, a cushion. And I'll invite you to join me in some mindful breathing practices. These practices can be used at any point in time should there be any discomfort, anxiety, stress, even pain. So the first one is called pursed lip breathing. What you'll do is inhale through the nose, filling up and then blowing out birthday candles, dragging that exhale breath 2 to 4 times longer than the inhale. We'll do that one more time. In through the nose and out through the mouth. One last time together, in through the nose and out through the mouth. Now, there's an alternate breath called the 4-7-8 breath that was made popular by the grandfather of integrative medicine, Dr. Andrew Weil. He was influenced by traditional yogic pranayama breathing for this 4-7-8 breath. So, this also can be used when you are experiencing any discomfort. So, you'll inhale through your nose for 4, 2, 3, 4, and then hold your breath for 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale out through your mouth. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll do that one more time together. Inhaling through your nose for 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then exhaling 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So these are 2 different breathwork options for you to try in moments of distress. I don't recommend doing more than 3 to 5 breath cycles, as sometimes you can actually breathe down your CO2 and actually cause some lightheadedness. So try 3 to 5 breath cycles and see what you notice. The latter 4-7-8 breath, I would not recommend for anyone with any chronic lung disease. I hope you'll take some moments to try some mindful breathing. Thanks so much for practicing with me.